The Trump administration just moved to shut down the skies over a major American city for 10 days with zero warning, zero explanation, and then appeared to lie about why it happened. You know, it all unraveled in just a few hours, so let's talk about what happened with El Paso, Texas. Right, because late last night, you had the FAA dropping a bombshell. They issued a temporary flight restriction over El Paso, Texas. So for the next 10 days, everything up to 18,000 feet and within a 10-nautical-mile radius was off limits to all pilots, excluding Mexican airspace. And the accompanying notice to air missions, it did not mince words. It warned pilots who do not adhere to the following procedure may be intercepted, detained, and interviewed by law enforcement/security personnel. It said violators could face civil penalties or criminal charges, and then came the kicker. They said the United States government may use deadly force against the airborne aircraft if it is determined that the aircraft poses an imminent security threat. So naturally, people wanted to know, well, okay, what the hell is going on? And then the FAA's answer was just special security reasons. That's it, no other details. Now, they also issued a second restriction for Santa Teresa, New Mexico, which is a small community about 15 miles northwest of El Paso Airport, but the focus, it stayed on El Paso because, you know, it's not just some small town. We're talking about the 23rd most populous city in America with roughly 700,000 residents. Then add in Ciudad Juarez just over the border. I mean, you're looking at a metropolitan area of over 2 million people. El Paso's airport alone had nearly 3.5 million passengers last year. So when the airport posted on Instagram that all commercial, cargo, and general aviation flights were shut down through February 20th, you had people understandably confused and pissed off. Right? You know, to be fair, the FAA does issue temporary flight restrictions all the time for wildfires, hurricanes, a Super Bowl, stuff like that. But shutting down airspace over a major US city for 10 days with no explanation, that's highly unusual. And apparently, it's also pretty uncommon for these notices to go out without carve-outs for first responders and military aircraft. So with all this, you had a CNN correspondent covering aviation putting it bluntly this morning, saying a ban on all flights over a US city, including medevac and police helicopters, has no modern precedent. Even the post-9/11 restrictions and the ongoing ones over DC and New York were handled differently. Also, Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, whose district includes El Paso, released a statement saying, the highly consequential decision by the FAA to shut down the El Paso airport for 10 days is unprecedented and resulted in significant concern in the community. With her also adding that based on what her office gathered, there is no immediate threat to the community or surrounding areas, and that there was no advance notice provided to my office, the city of El Paso, or anyone involved in airport operations. And so she urged the FAA to immediately lift the restrictions, and actually, guess what? Shortly after, they did exactly that. You had the FAA announcing that the temporary closure was lifted, saying there is no threat to commercial aviation, all flights will resume as normal. Right, and then, around the same time, you had an unnamed Trump administration official telling reporters that the shutdown happened because Mexican cartel drones had breached the airspace, but the military, they dealt with it and everything was safe now. And you actually had Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy quickly echoing that version of events on social media, saying the FAA and DoD acted swiftly to address a cartel drone incursion, the threat has been neutralized, and there is no danger to commercial travel in the region. The restrictions have been lifted and normal flights are resuming. And so, you know, interesting story, except it started to unravel almost immediately, with Congresswoman Escobar coming out and saying that cartel drones being the reason is not the information that Congress has been given. She also pointed out that there have been drone incursions from Mexico going back to as long as drones existed, saying, so this is nothing new. And, you know, she's right. Back in July, in fact, the deputy director of the Homeland Security Department's counter-drone program told Congress that 27,000 drones piloted by organizations hostile to law enforcement had flown within 500 meters of the border over just 6 months in 2024. 27,000. So if cartel drones were really the issue, why now? Why this specific response? And when you see sources, they started telling a very different story. You had the New York Times reporting that the shutdown had something to do with a test of new counter-drone technology by the military at a nearby Army base. Then another person briefed by Trump officials backed this up, saying that the FAA's decision was prompted by concerns about the risks that this technology could pose to other aircraft in the area. And then other outlets just continued to confirm this account and then add to it. There was some reporting that the weapon being tested was a high-energy laser, and that because the Pentagon wanted to test it before the FAA was on board, the agency's administrator, Brian Bedford, decided to just close the airspace without alerting White House, Pentagon, or Homeland Security officials. And this is there have also been reports that what this anti-drone technology actually ended up being used against may have been a party balloon that had just been mistaken for a drone. So just to recap, the official story is cartel drones, we stopped them, all good, but the actual story appears to be that the military wanted to test anti-drone weapons and they didn't properly coordinate with anyone, and so the FAA panic shut down the entire city's airspace. So, you know, as far as the fallout, you've got local officials furious. El Paso Mayor Renard Johnson not holding back at a news conference.
I want to be very, very clear that this should have never happened. You cannot restrict airspace over a major city without coordinating with the city, the airport, the hospitals, the community leadership. That failure to communicate is unacceptable.
This wasn't just an inconvenience. The mayor noted that surgical equipment destined for city hospitals just didn't show up. You had medical evacuation flights forced to divert to a city in New Mexico more than 40 miles away. And this is just from a few hours of shutdown. Imagine if this had gone on for 10 days. Now, with all of that said, I do think it's important that we talk about some of the bigger context here. The military isn't testing anti-drone tech at the border for no reason. Going back a decade, one of Mexico's major cartels started systematically using drones for surveillance, combat, and transport. Today, officials have documented cartel conflicts where drones are being used to carry and deploy up to 50 kilograms of explosives at once. So US officials are concerned that they might eventually target Americans or law enforcement in the border region, though so far it appears that the thousands of drones spotted near the US, they've been used for drug smuggling and surveillance, not attacks yet. But also, I'll say here is an ironic twist. When it comes to cartel violence, a lot of the weapons come from the United States. And in fact, this week, Mexico's defense secretary revealed that roughly half of the high-powered 50 caliber cartridges seized from cartels since 2012 can be traced back to an ammunition factory in Missouri, one that's also owned by the US government. It's an investigation by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and the New York Times found that the ammo from that plant has become a staple for organized crime in Mexico and has even been used by mass shooters in the United States. Now, the Army has defended this by saying that commercial sales from the plant, they save taxpayers around $50 million annually by lowering the government's costs for ammunition. But also, it's not just ammunition. You also had Mexico's defense secretary saying nearly 80% of weapons seized by the current administration came from the United States. The Mexican government actually sued major American gun makers, alleging that their business practices fueled violence in Mexico, though the Supreme Court threw that case out. But all of this, it brings us back to why this story and this situation matters. It reveals a dangerous pattern. You've got a government taking extreme action with no transparency, no coordination with local officials, and then lying about why it happened. A major American city had its airspace shut down, affecting hospitals, emergency services, and hundreds of thousands of people because federal agencies couldn't be bothered to communicate properly. And then when caught, they just blamed cartel drones instead of admitting that it was one of their own weapons tests that caused the chaos.